This is a story about passion, of course, about cultural conflicts and cultural shocks, and also about anger. I believe that anger is a very, very powerful force, and it makes you do, if you can channel it well, it can make you do really, really interesting things. I come from Italy, of course, and I got my job at MoMA because I read an ad in ID magazine. It's true. I applied, and I got the job. And I was in the United States because of the Aspen conference, where I first met Richard Saul-Wurman. I was the Italy coordinator for the 1989 edition, which was about Italy. And I just got a crush on the AV guy, who happened to be a surfer from Malibu. So I started going to Los Angeles, stalking the poor guy who couldn't care less about me. But what happened instead is that I landed a position at UCLA, and I was lecturing, going back and forth with Italy, and then one day I decided that I had enough of that life, and I opened ID magazine, and there it was. Of course, I'm kind of dramatizing a little bit the story, but it's the truth, and that's what happens many times. And I wanted to tell you about a few episodes and anecdotes that happened throughout my career as a curator at MoMA, which is now almost 16 years long, that are going to help you understand my beneficial, good, positive anger. The first person that I encountered when I got to MoMA, and the person that interviewed me for my job, besides Terry Riley, who hired me, who should be behind me, you know, it's like in his absolute mischief and power, was Philip Johnson. Philip Johnson interviewed me in his office in the Lipstick Building, now made even more famous by Bernie Madoff. But at that time, he had his offices there, and I walked into his office, and I was really trembling until he received me, and I sat in front of him, and he was like that. He looked at me with his glasses, and then he went like, "Design is dead." That was the interview. Can you imagine? So you're on the other side, and all of a sudden, you're forced by the biggest provocateur in the world, and sometimes his provocations were much, much more seriously negative than what I'm talking about, you know, what I'm referring to. But the biggest provocateur in the world forced me to gush out the reason why I wanted to be at MoMA, the reasons why I think that design is one of the highest creative expression that humankind can actually ever enterprise, and everything else that I wanted to do at MoMA. So the importance of having the right hook in front of you, the right person to get out the best of you by making you slightly angry or uncomfortable, I never forgot. The second thing that made me uncomfortable was the cultural clash with MoMA and with New York. You know, I had never seen a memo in my life. The first time I got a memo, I thought it was so rude. I thought that this person needed to put in writing what we just said. What is this? It's not trust. I went to cry into the bathroom. And I remember, and then it all kind of got resolved by the fact that I started working on my first show, Mutant Materials. And Mutant Materials was in '95. And it was a show that was meant to show how materials at that time, and even more today, were not anymore only the field and the property of engineers, of chemical engineers and scientists, but also of designers. Means of production at that time had empowered designers already to cast their own resin objects. You could have molds that were no more in stainless steel, but could be in composite. So power to designers, and that's all that I wanted to preach. And the exhibition had also another innovation. Okay, we can move beyond. That was Philip Johnson. See, mean with his, mischievous. Thank you very much. Oops, and now I'm breaking the remote. With his character. Which one is the forward? Oh, the wheel. Oh, wow. Yes, there. Oh, too fast. So Design and the Elastic Mind was this exhibition, and people could also touch a lot of the objects. Another little anecdote. At MoMA, being at MoMA is wonderful and also frustrating at the same time, because as you can imagine, design is not the priority. But the beautiful thing is that 80% of my public is there to see Matisse and Picasso, to take the vitamins of Matisse and Picasso that the cultural doctor says should be part of your daily regimen or weekly or monthly regimen. And then they stumble upon a design show, and I have to make the shows so narrative, so compelling, so sexy that they're forced to stay there. So Mutant Materials was in the dead of the summer. It was this dark blue room, and people could touch the objects. So that was irresistible, and everybody was in the show. But what I wanted to tell you that was one of my first encounters with the conflict between power and reality is that when you're at MoMA, you feel like you're on top of the world, you feel like you have power, and everybody's going to take your call and give you anything that you want or need. So I wanted this composite plane that was made by Lancer, a company in Oregon. And so I called up Lancer, saying, I'm Paola Antonelli, I'm an associate curator. At that time, I was associate. Now I'm senior, pretty sad. But, you know, I'm an associate curator. I would like, please, to have one of your airplanes for 3 months for an exhibition at MoMA. They basically hung up the phone on me. So, you know, at that point, I started courting them, sending flowers, sending books, sending messages, poems, you name it. Until 3 months later, Lance Neibauer, the head of Lancer, called me up and said, hey, you know, my cousin's first sister's cousin's-in-law, whatever, was in New York, saw MoMA. She said, it's cool. You can have a plane. So at that point, you know, that's all the power of family. That's always the trick. At that point, you know, they wanted to give me their best plane ever. This is a kit plane. Kit plane makers are worse than truck drivers. They decorate their planes like there's no tomorrow. So he sent me the picture of this airplane that had an Aztec goddess hairbrushed on the bottom of the plane with like bubbles and flames all over that I was supposed to hang in the lobby of MoMA. So at that point, I had to come up with some smart idea. So I told him, you know, it's a fabulous plane, but you're really putting me in trouble because, you know, the lobby of MoMA is the purview of the painting and sculpture department. And it's politically difficult because this plane would really, really outshadow the Matisse and the Picassos that are in the lobby and the Rodin, you know. And he was like, oh my God, you're right. So I got my silver plane, which was great. On to Achille Castiglioni. This is an interesting show because it talks about the narrative that is necessary in design. Another thing that made me and still makes me angry is the lack of critical stature for design in the United States. Now, my anger is slowly vanishing because magazines and mass media, the usual ones, are becoming so unimportant that it will ultimately be a moot question. But isn't it outrageous that the New York Times has a perfume critic and not a design critic? There's only there was Bruce Nussbaum at Business Week. There's Alice Rawsthorne at the Herald Tribune. Once a year, perhaps the Atlantic Monthly writes something. And once every 3 years, the New Yorker comes up with a long story on the new Gillette razor for women, but that's about it. So, you know, this attempt to position design in everybody's culture is also our responsibility. We need to become better storytellers. And in the case of the Achille Castiglioni exhibition, this is hard to see, and I'm sorry. What I decided to do, because every single object had a story behind it, and I really wanted people to understand what goes on in the mind of a designer when he or she approaches an object, I hired Steven Guarnaccia, a great illustrator, to do a little vignette for every single object in the show. Vignettes that explained the fun and the absurdity and the ingeniousness behind every single object. And it was a great, great stratagem because people were looking at the images and then they would read the stories, like the Arco lamp that you've all seen, the one that is marble. You know, you cannot see it there, but it's a marble base, and it projects the lamp right far away. The two Castiglioni brothers were renting an apartment in Milan and wanted to have a dining table lamp that fell in the middle of the dining table, but they didn't want to make holes in the ceiling because it was a rental. So they thought of street lamps. Street lamps throw the light source away from the base. But of course, they didn't want to make a hole in the floor either. So they thought, what's a really heavy material and cheap? Because in Italy, that's cheap. Carrara marble. So they made this marble base, a telescopic arch that is in 3 segments. And at that point, the light source is 7 feet away. So you can sit, you can serve behind the person sitting, so you have a perfect dining table ceiling lamp without touching the ceiling. And the last final detail, which people loved, is that the lamp has a hole in the marble base. What's that for? Well, if you want to move the lamp, 2 guys put a broomstick in the hole, and they can move it around. So how do you tell this whole story? You really need to find a way, but it's important to be able to tell that story not only for the Arco lamp, for the paper clip, for the Post-it note. It's important to give people a little bit of background so they can understand the human implications of design. They don't take it for granted as something that just pops up. Another exhibition and another story is the Workspheres exhibition a few years later. It was 2000. It was the time when wireless technology and its promise were starting to pop up, but everything was so frustrating. You remember you traveled, you had the wrong plug, the server at home was not working, you had to dial in. Everything was a mess. So I asked a really brilliant designer, Martí Guixé from Barcelona, to work on this issue. And of course, at the beginning, he started working on a new laptop, a new device, until one day he threw everything away, and he decided instead to work on a set of pills. Martí designs foods and really dives into material culture. He decided that the best way to enable somebody to work efficiently while traveling was to make the travel really special and meaningful and really eventful. So he designed a set of pills, things that go through your mouth that can help you while traveling. For instance, there is a pill that you take when you're jet-lagged, but you really want to pay attention to somebody new that you've met, and it's made of aluminum foil, and you put it in your mouth, and it reacts with the cavity fillings in your mouth, so it's so disgusting that you wake up. Another pill is spices from home that you can crumble upon your disgusting airplane food. It's all like that, to the point that you would have dispensers in railway stations and in airports. And you could buy not only these pills, but also underwear that you forgot at home. And the underwear is rolled up and just like coated in starch. So you put it in your mouth, and the starch dissolves, and here comes your socks, or here comes your... It was just this beautiful, poetic thing. So more and more, also designers are resorting to storytelling to show people the implications of what they do. And even more so when you move into today's realm, when you have all of these teams that are being built that are really interdisciplinary and that are really meant to advance the world and not simply produce a new cute, curly, cute chair. The last exhibition that I want to tell you about is Design and the Elastic Mind, which is the show that I organized last year at MoMA, and that was so lucky for me. Design and the Elastic Mind was born out of anger. That's why I'm telling you anger is important. For about 8 months, I had been proposing to the exhibitions committee at MoMA, which is a committee made of peers, of people like me. I'm also part of it. I was proposing this exhibition called Natural. It was an exhibition about the meaning of contemporary organic design. The idea behind it was that the computer enables us to be so close to nature, and we've been trying to get close to nature for centuries, that finally we could move from calling it organic design to moving it natural design. And actually, Neri Oxman today will tell you even more about it. They kept on rejecting this idea. I had already planned it all. I had spoken with the people that do the dioramas at the Museum of Natural History. I wanted to do the exhibition with dioramas where you would have, the famous gecko and the way it sticks to the ceiling and the new product. So you would have the diorama with the gecko and then the new product. It was all in my mind. They kept on rejecting it. So I said, okay, you know what? I want to do an exhibition about design and science, not knowing what I would get myself into. Thinking that they would think it was so absurd that they would agree to natural. And instead, they said, oh, great, design and science. So, oh my God, design and science. Well, the exhibition was a gamble, but it turned out to be a big success. And it was founded on many different principles, because every time you do a show in a place like MoMA, you have to think of your really wide audience. You have to be able to speak to a really wide audience. And at the same time, you want to think of your community. You want to give them a sense of belonging. And the exhibition was based on the idea that designers, when they're good, take revolutions in science, in technology, in history, revolutions that would otherwise remain floating up in ether, and they transform them into objects that you and I can use. The classical example is the internet. And yesterday I proposed for acquisition to my committee the @ symbol, and it sparked a big debate. But anyway, it was really based on this idea, designers and their role in innovation as interpreters. And it went really, really well. Until the night before the opening of the show, I was not sleeping, thinking it would be a complete flop. And instead, people got it. People got the need to really push forward by means also of design. And I think that one of the reasons for that was that every single object had a story, and a compelling story at that. There's a whole group of designers that are really using narrative and scenarios in order to be a thorn in the side of tech companies. Some companies hire them to make their life difficult so that they can think of possible scenarios. And in particular, Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby in England have been doing so, and they kind of single-handedly invented this new field called design for debate at the Royal College of Art in London. To show you what they do, you see here at the bottom this weird woman with weird objects around that. It's a scenario, it's a video built on the idea that we always think that robots in the future will be like Rosie of the Jetsons. They will take care of us and be like this kind of maternal or paternal presences in our life. And instead, Tony and Fiona said, well, what if instead robots were really needy and neurotic, and we had to cuddle them and talk to them before they even started acting as part of our life and part of our family? And they made this beautiful video that was actually directed by Noam Turan, in which you don't really know. I mean, she looks a little bit like the Blade Runner replicant. So you don't really know who's the robot, and then you start to realize that the robots are those objects that tremble when there are magnetic fields and are scared when other people come around. So it's a whole movie that really forced us to acquire this particular piece in conjunction with the media and video department. So it's also wonderful to see how the need to narrate, the need to be more compelling in explaining what design is about, is forcing designers not only to work with engineers and technologists, but also with poets and writers, and really they need to learn a brand new way to communicate. Noam Turan, top left, is one of the best examples of this. He's a designer. He calls himself a designer, but he's also an artist and a great video artist. In that video, he designed a contraption that enables you to follow all of Breathless, à bout de souffle, the original movie with Jean-Paul Belmondo. And the whole contraption enables you to do everything that Jean-Paul Belmondo does while you're watching the movie, right? So you have the hat, you have the cigarette, you have the gun, you have, the steering wheel. And it's this idea of design that can really help us realize our most hidden desires. There's actually another video that he did that is quite fantastic. He researched some stories of kinky wishes and kinky habits of Japanese people. And then he designed all these contraptions to respond to their habits. So one is a vacuum cleaner that is built, that is constructed so that it vacuums your whole body from top to bottom, because that's what a husband's, because a deceased wife did to her husband. It's really quite interesting to see. He also designed a contraption. His idea is that whenever a relationship breaks, what you miss the most are not the really good moments, but the most annoying things that really sparked all of your fights every single day. So Noam designed a series of contraptions that repeat these annoyances. For instance, there's an object that steals your sheets from your bed at night, another one that smokes your cigarette, another one that throws the dishes. Is this design? Yes, it is. It's borderline art. And it's one of the issues that we're really dealing with today. And Saul was talking about the fact that silos don't mean that much anymore, and the fact that we really need to learn from other people, and we cannot give labels anymore. So hence the joint acquisitions, hence the debates on the @ sign, hence all this new amazing possibilities that we're dealing with every day. And I agree with Saul. Curating is nothing more than sifting. A great curator at the Museum of Modern Art, Emilio Ambas, you might know of him. He's also a designer and an architect, but he curated some of the most beautiful shows at MoMA in the 1970s, from Italy, the New Domestic Landscape, to also an exhibition that asked designers to come up with new ideas for taxis in New York City. But he actually said, we have a collection of oral histories at the Museum of Modern Art that are open only to insiders. You can't go and see them very easily. But he spoke in this oral history, and he said that there are different types of curators. And there's, of course, the curator that curates, that conserves, the traditional idea of museums where you conserve materials for posterity, and you make sure that they don't rot, they don't get destroyed, they don't fade. And then there's the curator that's a hunter-gatherer. I really like that definition, and it kind of reflects also what I do. But I think that one of the most important jobs as a curator in the future will be exactly that of sifting information and organizing it so that people can use it in the best way and in the most compelling way. It's akin to the job of a reporter. Sometimes I think that I'm a little bit of a reporter, and I've always loved journalists and idolized them. So I like that idea. No reporting is ever objective. You know it very well. It depends on what you put forth, on what the apostrophe is. But the moment you are able to explain in understandable words the marvels of humanity, of different fields of our human endeavor, then you're really giving a big service to society. That's what I hope curators will do, and that's what I hope designers will do. Ultimately, I'm hoping that designers, because of their amazing synthetic capabilities, because of their ability to build teams and to reach out to the people that they need at the right time, will become almost the intellectuals of future society. You know how in France, every time they need to decide a new price for milk, they call Bernard-Henri Lévy and they ask him what he thinks about it and publish a book? I'm hoping that the same will happen here in the future with designers. I'm hoping that designers will get involved in healthcare. I'm trying to convince many of the trustees in our museum to establish a Bring Your Designer to Work Day, in which they throw a designer in a brainstorming meeting and see what happens. I'm just trying to show the viability of design and how it will not change the world single-handedly, but it will be the catalyst for that change to happen. Thank you very much.